Okay, so are we all good? Can we move to the lesson? All ready to step into the world of the literary theory? Yeah. Okay, so before moving to literary theory, I just want you to think of what is meant by theory, right? Before moving to all these big definitions, what do you identify as theory, Rembrandt? Any of you? If you want, you can move forward, right? Okay, the fan, I understand. I don't want dictionary definitions, right? Very big scholarly definitions. Just simply, what do you think as a theory? I told you that there are no right or wrong answers in literature, right? Feel free to explore your ideas. A very simple definition of theory, as you think of it. I think when you write research papers, right? Up to now, you have applied all these theories sometimes. Maybe not to all the research papers, but for some, you may have added or applied theories. You don't have to think of it as rocket science, right? A very simple kind of, not exactly definition. What do you think of theory? How do you understand theory?
Theory is something that refers to a set of concept imposed by using scientific way or
Okay, very good, Trevor. So I was just asking for a very simple idea and you came up with a scholarly definition. So that was very good. A set of concepts. So that is the easiest way of looking at theory. So a set of concepts, a set of ideas, right? Forwarded by different scholars. And also you can come up with theories as well, right? So all these people who came up with theories, they were scholars like you, right? They were just individuals, but they came up with theories. For instance, we can take Karl Marx, just an individual, right? But he came up with Marxist theory. So that theory was so strong that it was named after himself, right? Marxist theory. So we identify that with a person. Likewise, literally a set of ideas, a set of concepts, and also I would say a set of foundations, right? Yeah, founding ideas. So when it comes to literary theory, a set of ideas or else a foundation of things, concepts where we can stand on when we explore something, when we explore any subject. Let's take literature, right? So to explore literature, we can stand on this foundation of theory. Let's say you are studying political science. Then you have political theories, right? Let's say you are exploring social science, sociology. Then you have all these theories which are explored by or which are invented by sociologists, right? So you can invent theories, right? You can come up with new theories, and you can explore the existing theories as well, and you can add more, right? As in, you can add more ideas, more concepts to these existing theories as well. Am I clear there, reverends? Right? So a theory is basically a set of ideas, as you said. So it is very easier when you simply look at things, right? So likewise, you can understand the concept of theory without thinking of it as a very big thing, just as a set of ideas, right? Fundamental ideas, or a foundation of ideas where we can stand on, a pedestal where we can stand on, right? So we can explore things, something like that. So, yeah.
What is the difference between method and theories?
Okay, so a theory, as I already told you, and also as you already came up with, Reverend, a set of ideas, right? So you can apply those theories to your research or to your study, right?
Are
But
those scientifically proved?
not always. So when it comes to scientific theories, those are scientifically proven, Reverend. Let's say Newton's theory, scientifically proven, right? Einstein's theories, and all these scientific theories, physics, right? Biology, chemistry, maths, all these things, right? But when it comes to humanities and social sciences, specifically humanities includes all these subjects related to arts stream, right? Languages, literature, and specifically when it comes to literature, those theories are not scientifically proven, right? Most of the time.
Mostly
Hypothetical. But they have a practical value, Reverend, right? When you look at, let's say, there is this concept, sub-theory called dialectic antagonism, right? Don't be scared by the big word, right? Dialectic antagonism under Marxist theory, right? So it is also identified as Marxist literary criticism when it comes to literature. That means we can apply all these theories, as in theories which come under humanities, and also science sometimes. That's why we incorporate psychoanalysis to literature, right? It's something scientific related to medical science, but we apply it to literary criticism as well. So what I was talking about is when we take this dialectic antagonism, right? So the idea there is the social classes, right? Specifically the major social classes. Let's simply say rich and the poor. They say rich and the poor are perpetually means always, right? They are always, right, locked in a struggle. So they are rich, they are poor, they are locked in a struggle always, right? They are kind of, fighting with each other. So that is the simple idea behind this theory of dialectic antagonism. So do you think that's something which can be scientifically proven? That rich and poor are always struggling? No, that cannot be scientifically proven. But you can come up with some statistical data, right? So all these struggles, let's take French Revolution, Russian Revolution, right? What happened here? Let's take the election, which happened recently, right? Last year. So those are evidence, but those cannot be scientifically proven, because we cannot always say all the rich people are fighting with poor people, all the poor people are fighting with rich. We cannot say so, because we see people in between, right? There's the middle class, right? And also there are poor people who are aspiring to become rich. We discussed about this idea of social ladder. Can you remember climbing the social ladder? And also there are rich people, let's say extremely rich people, Bill Gates, right? Steve Jobs. What is happening with them? They are trying to become more simple, right? So there's this idea, as far as I remember, Bill Gates, right? So he used to sleep on a mat, right? In a very small hut. So they are seeking something outside this materialistic world. So we cannot say always rich and poor. are locked in a struggle. It might not be the case all the times, but when it comes to most of the times, right? When we look at the majority, with statistical data we can prove, right? So this is the case. So then we can accept that as a theory because there's a practical value, but we cannot scientifically prove it. In a lab, right? We cannot prove it. We cannot collect samples, as in blood samples from rich people, from poor people, and then we cannot do a test, a scientific test. But we can prove it to an extent again, right? I kind of emphasize on it, this word, to an extent. It's not the case all the times. So did I answer your question? Right? So not always scientifically proven when it comes to humanities. In social sciences, maybe. Most of the times. Let's take geography. We are looking at soil samples, right? Soil. And you can, of course, conduct a test and come up with a hypothesis and prove it scientifically, right? When it comes to social sciences and political sciences, no, not scientifically proven research. So there was this professor called Nandasena Ratnapala. Maybe you have heard, right, Reverend? So there was this professor, Reverend, at Chapur University. So he did a research on beggars. So to conduct this research, you may have heard. So he disguised himself as a beggar and he lived among all these beggars. And then he says that even his students, right? So I have scolded him when he was disguised as a beggar, Kalakanya, as you know, with all these words. Yeah. So like that, right? So you can prove it. But again, that is not a scientific research. So we call these research living in research. That Professor Ratnapala's research is a living in research. So he went to that community, lived among them, and then collected evidence and proved his hypothesis. Maybe about, beggars and how people interact with beggars, right? So how perceptions change. Yeah. So likewise. So we are talking about these theoretical frameworks under humanities, right? So we have several branches. We will slowly explore all these branches, right? So that was a very simple introduction to theory, right? So here you can see kind of a scholarly definition. A well substantiated explanation for a phenomenon. A phenomenon means, Reverend, what do you mean by a phenomenon? Yeah, let's say a fact, Reverend. Yeah, the most simple definition would be a fact, right? A well substantiated. So that's what we were discussing up to now. So it has to be substantiated. So when it comes to dialectic antagonism, we discussed that. So rich and poor are locked in a perpetual struggle. So that can be practically proven, but that's not the case everywhere. So it is not scientifically proven, but we have proof or we have evidence that it might be the case. So I ask you to look at the election which happened in Sri Lanka last year, right? Yeah. Even in India, right? So now the president is this lady called Draupadi. She's coming from a very lower class, right? So how the tables have turned upside down, right? Yeah, likewise. And a well substantiated explanation. So that means there is an explanation, right? You can call it a hypothesis, right? Yeah. So that explanation is well substantiated. So there are evidence to say that this can be identified as a theory. Or otherwise, any individual can come up with any idea and say this is my theory, right? So you can say black is white, right? White is black. Or let's say you can come up with any absurd theory, right? You can say that all the individuals are, let's say, mad people, right? So likewise, any theory you can come up with, but again you have to prove it. You cannot just come up with anything, right? So let's say we are talking about something related to social classes. So you cannot just come up with something if you cannot prove it So as I told you, when it comes to social classes, right? So there are enough details to prove all these theories. Marx has done it. We will explore Marxist theory here, right? So there are all these sociologists, Durkheim and all these people, they have proven all these things. And when it comes to feminism, right? So there was this idea called female mind, right? Even some doctors, they come up with this idea that females have a different pattern of thinking and males have a different pattern of thinking. And some feminists were arguing if there was kind of, if this theory called female mind is true, then there should be a concept called female liver too, because that's absurd, right? So individuals have different thinking patterns. You cannot say all the females think in the same manner, that all the males think in the same manner. That's something very absurd. So that theory was rejected after some time. Likewise, you need to remember, I have mentioned it somewhere as well, because we came to that point, I'm just mentioning it. You need to remember, reference, that theories can be changed and challenged as well. Give me a minute. Okay? So you may go through the first slide. Okay, sorry about that. Right. So we were talking about that first definition, right? Yeah. So it has to be proven, but when it comes to humanity, it's not always scientifically, right? With the statistical data. But even without the statistical data, there are some stuff that you can prove, right? So let's say when it comes to feminism. So this lady called Virginia Woolf, you may have heard, a poetess, right? Yeah. So she belongs to these feminist waves. So what she did was she wrote this book called A Room with a View. You have a chapter of that in your gender syllabus, right? Yeah, we cannot call kind of, gender, I would say theory, something specific without mentioning Virginia Woolf, because she was that influential. So there she comes up with several theories related to gender. So those are not scientifically proven and not even statistically proven, right? But again, you can refer to some stuff like that, right? Yeah. So here, then you have conceptual frameworks that organize knowledge and literature and guide research. That's another way of looking at theory. I would say kind of a scholarly definition. Conceptual frameworks. So that's what Reverend Susita mentioned, right? So it is a set of concepts, set of ideas. So it is kind of said in kind of a different manner, using different words, conceptual frameworks. Because you may have seen in research papers, you have a separate section called theoretical framework, right? So what do you mean by a framework, Reverend? A frame, let's say. Let's say a window frame, right? So we have a practical example here. So what is happening with the window frame here? Why do we have a window frame? We are thinking of a philosophical idea. And I'm just asking simply, why do we have a window frame? We could have just, using exactly the same words, window frame. The frame is there to frame the window, right? Yeah. So, likewise, we need these theories to frame our analysis, right? Not our thinking. You don't have to frame your thinking. But when you are doing a research reference, right, you need to have a scope, right? That means you need to kind of, look at a specific area. You cannot explore all the things in the world. That is not possible. You have to have a scope. Likewise, a theory is there to frame your research. It can be your research, it can be your study, your analysis, right? The area that you study, right? So to frame your research or study, you need to have this framework. So that's what a framework does. It frames your study, right? It is easier for you then. So when you look at literary theory, you may think that it is something difficult, but when you explore literary theory, so I'm trying to kind of, incorporate some literary texts as well, otherwise it would be boring, just to do literary theory. We will try to explore some stuff using these literary theories, right? Then you would see it is very easier when we have a theory. We can frame our study, right? That's why we call it a conceptual framework. We call it a conceptual framework because unlike the window frame, that framework is made up of concepts, right? Just like this window frame is made of wood, right? Just like that, theories, right? Theoretical frameworks are made up of concepts, ideas, right? Yeah, conceptual frameworks, and those are used to organize knowledge, right? So there are several areas of knowledge out there. Can be political science, can be social science, right? Chemistry, biology, if we think of it kind of, out of the humanities area. Several branches of knowledge, right? So these branches of knowledge are framed inside these theoretical frameworks, right? Yeah. And also literature, not only knowledge, but literature. And again, I want you to look at literature with theoretical frameworks as well as without theoretical frameworks as well. Because you are scholars who are studying literature. When you are studying literary theory, when you are doing research, you need to have that theoretical framework true. But when you are kind of, outside the classroom, you have to kind of, I would say, secure that part in yourself, right? Which is not framed. You need to think out of the box, because I have seen that kind of, happening to some people. When they are becoming researchers, they always tend to, explore literature inside this framework, right? And again, on, I would say, another hand, right? When you look at literature with these theoretical frameworks, again you have several paths that you can step on, right? When we explore, you will see you have feminist theory, you have Marxist theory, you have a spirituality, right? Even when it comes to that poem Upagupta, right? You can explore it using several perspectives. You can use gender, you can use spirituality, right? The response of that reference, the spiritual power, right? And how spiritual power overcomes the worldly realm, right? In different ways you can read that poem, and also you can just read it as a literary masterpiece. You can look at the similes, right? All these things are possible inside this literary theory as well. Am I scaring you, right? Because what I want to tell you is, when you are becoming researchers, don't let your creative side die, right? That's what I'm kind of, simply trying to say. The theories are important, you can apply them, that's true. But also you should have that freedom in mind to explore a literary text, right? So when it is applicable, when it is needed, you can apply theories, and also you can simply explore something, right? Without being a slave to the theories. It's just like the mind reference, right? There's this Buddhist idea that mind should be your slave, right? You should not be the slave of your mind, like that. So this literary theory that we are going to study, that we are going to explore, should be your slave, right? You should not be the slave of the literary theory, right? Yeah, okay. So those are simple definitions of theories, right? So you can use these two, as I already told you, to explore your analysis, right, your studies, and also research. So that's about theory, right? So are there any questions about those two factors, reference, the first two definitions that we went through? If anything is not clear, we need to, get all this clarified and step on to the next stage. Feel free to tell me. It's clear. Reverend Susita? Clear. Okay. So based on that concept, what do you think literary theory is? Simply? A very simple way of looking at it. I mean, I'm not asking for a definition. So here you have the Oxford Research Encyclopedia definition, right? Before moving to that, what do you identify as literary theory? If theory is a set of ideas, right? A foundation where you can base your ideas, right? Where you can explore ideas with the help of a... Yes, Reverend? Yeah.
Harmless nerve concept is based on our knowledge.
Our knowledge may be related to literature, Reverend? Yeah. So, Reverend Susita, any other idea that you can add? So, definitely it is related to literature, right? When we say literary theory, that's why we use the word literary. It comes under theory, definitely a branch of theory, I would say, right? A very simple idea would be, so he came up with a good idea. Maybe you can add something to it. If you want, of course, right? I'm not forcing any of you. Have I become someone very scary after the semester break? Because this field can be kind of, complex, so I want it to be very, I would say, understandable. Right? That's why I'm asking you whether you have got it. I want to check. That's why I'm asking you, comprehension checking questions to know whether you have got it. We will go very slowly, right? I don't want to burden you with all these things, right? Even though they look like very difficult areas, this is simple actually, right? At the end of the day, when we look at the larger picture, it is simple, but you need to understand it from the scratch, I would say, right? Yeah. So, yeah, Reverend.
What I understood was the same thing as he said.
Mm-hmm.
It's about just based on our knowledge.
Not only our knowledge, but yeah. The existing knowledge, I would say, the knowledge which exists out there right now. Yeah. So a set of ideas, as you said, and as Reverend Nitya said, related to knowledge. And based on what, Reverend? When we say literary theory, it's based on? Yes, ideas. And the subject field would be literature. That's the answer I was looking for, right? It's related to literature. So here you can identify it as, I would say, the basis where you can ground your ideas related to literature, your thoughts related to literature. So you can understand it as a ground or a place that you can stand on, where you can step on when you explore literature. So you can think of this as an assistant, right? You call all these AI platforms assistant, right? Your assistant, like that, right? Yeah, that would be your assistant. So when you look at theory in that way, it's very easier. So it is not a burden, but it helps you to look at literature more clearly, I would say, right? It makes it easier to explore literature. So a basis or a place, a foundation. Let's think of a foundation of a home, right? Maybe at your house or your temple, you may have seen how a foundation is laid, right? So a foundation is laid, and only upon that the house is built, right? By and by. Likewise, this is a foundation. The theory is the foundation. So initially we discussed about theory in general, related to all the subjects. But here we are looking at literary theory, specifically related to literature. So the foundation of ideas which are related to literature, right? So I'll upload the recording as well. So if you have anything unclear, you can listen to it again, right? And then if you find anything not clear, you may ask me again. I'm all okay to explain it again, because Reverend Nandasiri is not here. I will definitely upload it, so he can also go through it before the next lecture. Then also he has an idea, because our next lecture will be on our first theory, which is Aristotle's Poetics, right? Yeah. Okay. So now we will move to, this is scholarly definition. So this is taken from where? Here you have the name. Still we are on the first slide, reverends. The first one. Third point. So we explored the first two. Now the third one. So it is taken from the Oxford. Yeah, the Oxford Research Encyclopedia of Literature. That's where it has been taken. So here we will slowly explore this one, right? Paying attention to each word. So literary theory is the practice of theoretical. That means it is composed of several theories, right? Theoretical, methodological. And I'm sorry, I think I didn't answer your question, right? Methods, I think you came up with such a question. What is the difference between theory and methods? So I was going around several topics and that just skipped my mind. So it's good that it's also here. Theory and method. So method means, Reverend, how we conduct our research, our methodology, right? So theory is the conceptual framework. So let's say if you are exploring something related to gender, right, you will look at a subfield of feminist theory, right? So let's say you can use something called intersectionality. I'm just coming up with a theory. Intersectionality means, so there's this idea that women are discriminated not only because of their gender, but also because of their class. I think I have discussed this earlier as well. So that just crossed my mind, intersectionality. That's why I brought up that, right? So let's say a poor woman is discriminated more than a rich woman. An uneducated woman is discriminated more than an educated woman, right? So likewise. So that is called intersectionality. So if we are exploring, do you want me to stop, Reverend? You may write it, right? Yeah. Yeah. So we can use that theory, right? You can use that theory as your conceptual framework, right? Then that becomes the theoretical part of it, right? That is the theory. And you asked me about the method. So method means you are using that theory and exploring Maya Angelou's poems, right? So your methodology or the method that you will conduct it would be, you will do a textual analysis, right? That means you would explore Maya's poems, right? Let's say there are hundreds of poems, but you cannot explore everything. So under your methodology, you will select 8 of her poems. And then you will explore them one by one. Where can I find intersectionality? Then the theory also comes under the methodology at that moment, right? That's why some people put theory under the methodology. Methodology is how you do the research. Theory is what you apply, right? From the scholarly theories that are out there, what you apply. That is the theoretical part. Right, Reverend? And also, if I tell you more, taking another example about methodology. So, I was referring to this Professor Nandasen Ratnapala's research, right? So, his theory is based on Marxism because it is about, class difference, about beggars, right? And also, there are sociological theories, different theories. That is the theoretical part of it. The methodology would be living in research, right? So, if we kind of put aside all these big words like living in research, simply his methodology is disguising himself as a beggar, right? Putting some makeup on, right? Yeah. So likewise, putting some rough kind of, worn out clothes on, and then going to that community of beggars, living inside them and collecting data, right? He's collecting data from beggars, right? And not only from the beggars, but also from the outsiders. The people who treat him in different ways. I told you, his students have insulted him, right? So likewise, so he's collecting data, right? So that data collection process, right? And also the way that he conducts it, living inside the community. And after that, he's going to do what to the data? After collecting the data, you have to analyze these data, right? Then you can apply the theory to analyze the data. So you can see now theory is in a way under the methodology part because you are applying the theory, right? Yeah. Am I clear, Reverend? Yeah. Okay. So here you can see theoretical, methodological and sociological reflection. Why are we talking about sociology here as a separate factor? Because we cannot separate the society from us, right? So we are part of the society. So there's this idea that some people say that we are doing what we want to do. Do you think that's possible? Not always, right? Always we cannot act in the manner that we want. We are bound by the society. And that's why the society kind of runs smoothly, right? If there were kind of, no societal expectations, right? Not always the rules or laws or regulations, right? Societal norms, right? So sometimes people live according to these societal norms. And that's why they are kind of, behaving in a kind of a smooth way. That's why the society is going in this smooth flow, right? So because of that, we cannot be divided from the society because we are part of the society, right? So even when it comes to Buddhism, I would say, so Lord Buddha was born in a time where there were 62 religions, right? So that's why people say that Buddhism is like a flower, like a lotus, right? Yeah, which came up. But again, that happened within that society, right? So there was this kind of, he did not reject all the religions. He didn't say that all the people should be killed, right? All the other, I would say, believers of the other religions, no. right? Coexistence was there. Likewise, the society is there. So we cannot be divided from the society, right? Yeah. Okay. So there you can see theoretical, methodological and sociological reflection. So all these three are important. When it comes to literary theory, you need to have the theoretical part and also the methodology. Without the methodology, you cannot apply the theory, right? You have to have some data, right? So if I give you some recent example, Reverend Judy did a research on his bonsai garden, right? How bonsai garden is related to mindfulness, right? So there he applied the theory. I just suggested this theory to him, horticultural therapy theory, right? That was the theory that he used. That means it is related to mindfulness and gardening, not specifically bonsai gardening, mindfulness and gardening, but it is related to his one. So he could relate to it. So he collected data. So he referred to himself, again living in research, right? He referred to himself, how he felt while gardening, and also he asked some people who helped him, like Reverend Kanchana, who were gardeners there, right? And also some people who visited the garden. Likewise, he collected the data, and then to analyze those data, he used that theory, horticultural therapy theory, right? And then he conducted the research. Then he could come up with results based on those data, right? After collecting and analyzing those data, he could come up with the results, and those results were included under the discussion. And looking at those results, he could come up with the conclusion, right? That means there is a strong connection between bonsai gardening and mindfulness, right, Reverend? So likewise. So when you understand it with such examples, I think it is more clear, right? Yeah. Okay. So here you can see. So this is a theoretical, methodological and sociological reflection that accompanies the reading and interpretation of literary texts. So again you can see two ideas, reading and interpreting, right? So what is the difference between reading and interpreting, Reverends? In a very simple manner, I would say.
After reading what we understood, when we explain it.
Exactly, very good, right? So just reading means you are just reading for fun, let's say, right? Let's take Great Expectations. I don't think you got a time to read it for fun because you had to analyze and interpret it, right? If you read it for fun, right? So that is just reading. You are just enjoying the act of reading, right? But when you have to interpret something, you cannot just read it, right? You need to look at all the single minute details, right? Every detail, every minute detail you need to explore. You need to think of the meaning of Estella's name. What is the meaning of Estella's name, Reverends? Oh, very good. So you have not got dementia during the semester break, right? I'm impressed. So likewise, you need to explore those things, right? And why is she named so, right? So what is the connection with her attitude there? Miss Havisham or Peep, right? And why is it interpreting? So you know, right? Reading just for enjoyment. But it's not like that. When you are interpreting a text, right, then you are applying theories when you are interpreting, right? So let's take the same example, Great Expectations, right? So you can read it under a Marxist framework, Marxist theoretical framework. Why? There are references to several social classes, right? So what sort of a gentleman was Pip? It's not nice for me to kind of, ask such questions. What sort of a gentleman was Pip, Reverend? There's this specific name, it's at the tip of your tongue, but it's not coming out. Yeah, H is there. Not starting with H. H is in the middle of the word, starting with B.
Bourgeois.
Exactly, very good. Bourgeois gentleman. Yeah, but you write it in a different manner. Can you remember? Yeah. Okay, very good. I'm impressed. Okay, so a bourgeois gentleman. So with this idea of bourgeois gentleman, right, you have the idea of class. That means you have Marxist criticism there. And with reference to Estella and Havisham, what do you have, Reverend? And also Mrs. Joe, the Iron Woman. What is that theory that you can apply there? The larger theory, just like Marxist for the bourgeois gentleman, that concept. To Miss Havisham and Estella, what is the theory that you can apply? We discussed about that today itself. You don't have to go into details. The bigger theory is what is the theory related to women, gender? Don't think much. It's something that you are thinking very, like scholars. I was just referring to feminist theory, right? You were thinking of all the sub-branches. Yeah, okay, right? Take it easy, reverends, right? When you take something easy, it is easier for you to explore, right? There's this idea that there are, two handles that you can use for anything in the world. One handle is very smooth, the other handle is rough. When you use the smooth handle, it is easier for you to explore. So the same applies to the literary theory, right? It is easier for you to explore things like that, right? Yeah, okay. So we were talking about reading and interpreting, right? So we were referring to Great Expectations, how you can just read it for fun, just watch the movie for fun, and also how you can explore it with the help of Marxist theory about bourgeois gentlemen, as you mentioned, and also how you can explore Estella, Miss Havisham and Mrs. Joe related to feminist theory, right? So that's interpretation. You are interpreting it using theory, and for both you can use theory, right? Reading and interpretation. That's why those are identified as two branches of literary theory. So without reading, you cannot just directly leap to interpretation. First you have to read, right? Yeah. So unconsciously or subconsciously, so you can explore all these theories when you are reading as well, right? Even when you read something very simple, right? So all these would be there. So let's say that you see a poem which is very insulting, I would say, to a woman, right? Then don't you kind of feel that it is not nice? Even when you see a meme, let's say when you are scrolling through social media, right? You see something very insulting. Let's say to Buddhism, right? You see something. And then, so let's take this example. I don't know whether you saw this, some sort of a reference done by an actor about, I think about crossing the Neranjana river, about Kantaka. I cannot remember the exact quotation, right? A Sri Lankan actor, right? He has done some sort of a very, I would say, insulting comment, right? An insulting comment on that specific idea, right? So I think it is something related to a mobile phone. I cannot remember the exact context. Maybe you would remember, Evan. There were several memes about it, right? So he has made this comment. No, it is about this Patraya, right? So he has thrown away a mobile phone or something. Prince Siddhartha threw away a mobile phone, something like that, something very stupid, not even related, right? So when you see such a comment, you would find it insulting. Why? Not only about Buddhism, maybe about Jesus, let's say. So Jesus was crucified, right? Yeah, on the cross. And you see something very insulting about him. Do you suddenly feel that it is not nice? Maybe it is about Prince Siddhartha, it can be about Jesus, right? Anyone, or let's say about a woman, or a man, or anyone, right? Or a doctor, right? So you see something and you find it to be disturbing, right? Why? Because you have all these ideologies inserted in your thinking, right?
What would happen is the same thing happened to me.
Yeah, this Atupanayika Dharma thing also, right? And again, that is a theory. So in Buddhism, you get thousands of theories.
And sometimes we can even look the video that why they are killing each other. So we
Yeah.
feel like the same thing that what it happened to us.
Happen
in
to
the
us,
same way.
Reverend, exactly. And where does that thinking come, Reverend? That's because maybe you have Atupanayika Dharma inserted somewhere in your mind, right? What if it happens to me? So that is installed in your system, right, as a theory. Yeah. And also, once you read feminism, so maybe you have seen several memes like, women and that exclamation mark, that means, women do stupid things. So they post all this as in, the things that people do. And if it is related to a woman, they just put this hashtag women, right? Once you have studied feminist theory, right, you feel kind of suddenly you get this idea, this is not nice. Maybe earlier you wouldn't have felt so. You can just identify it as, oh, this is just, a meme. What is insulting in that? People should do some such things for fun, right? And as you very correctly said, let's say related to war, right? Military situations, again the same, right? So all these people, I would say the rulers who are engaged in war, right? They glorify war. Can you remember the poem, the last poem that we did? The Charge of the Light Brigade. Very good, right? Yeah. So in that poem, when you read that poem, you feel that something is not right about the war. But a soldier would not feel that way, right? So different perspectives. Your perspective comes from your ideologies. Ideologies means simply the way that you look at things, right? So these theories shape your ideologies, right? Your thinking, the way you look at things, right? And that's why many Westerners kind of embrace Buddhism. And I'm not kind of drawing a line or insulting anyone. But when most of the Westerners or Europeans do that, they do it correctly. Haven't you seen that? Right? So maybe because we are living in we are brought up in a Buddhist environment, as in we are trained to think in certain way, we don't feel the speciality or the uniqueness of Buddhism sometimes. I'm just not referring to individuals, 3 of us. I'm kind of referring to a community, the Buddhist community. Sometimes the Buddhist community take it for granted, right? Yeah. But when the Westerners feel that the depth of it, right? Sometimes we are kind of more concerned about the outward things, right? Not the inner wisdom which is kind of, given to us by Buddhism. But the Westerners, they have all this, wars going on and also all these criminal situations, right? Even the teenagers are using weapons and killing each other. Those things are happening in USA, right? So if such a person is ordained, right? Or if I would say in simple terms, come and embrace Buddhism, they would do that very correctly. They would follow the path very correctly because they have experienced several negative things and now they know this is this is an immense wisdom. They feel it, right? Yeah, likewise. So they identify the theories, I would say, inside it, right? Yeah. So again, these are not applicable to everyone, right? I'm just referring to a community, right? So it's like that, right? Yeah. So any questions, reference? Okay. Right. So it investigates the conceptual foundations of textual scholarship. Textual scholarship means the stuff, as in the texts that you study, right? Yeah. So investigate the conceptual foundations of textual scholarship. So that means when you are looking at a text, right? Let's take Pride and Prejudice. It is a text. But do you think when Austen was writing that book, she was not only writing a novel. She was purposely attacking the social norms. You can see it very clearly, right? With Elizabeth's character, with Darcy's character. You can see how all these norms are challenged, right? So those are purposely done. So those are the conceptual foundations which are underlying these texts, right? It's not just the textual scholarship, right? It's not just the text reference, right? When you write something, you can see that the writer has inserted some conceptual foundations. She has purposely inserted feminism there. She's talking about, right, women's right there, right? You can see it. It's very clear how women's rights are addressed there, right? Maybe not directly. She's doing it in a very nice literary manner, in a very creative manner, but that is done, right? So that is what meant by conceptual foundations under textual scholarship. Is that clear, everyone? Have you finished writing down reference? If you want more time, you may always ask, right? Yeah. Okay. So then the dynamics of textuality. What do you mean by dynamics reference? Changing stuff, right? So the changes, so I would say different perspectives. Yeah, right? So there are different perspectives, different aspects, various ways of looking at things, right? So I told you can read Pride and Prejudice as a feminist text, right, related to Elizabeth's character, and you can read it as a Marxist text related to classes, because you saw how classes are portrayed there. Darcy belongs to a very rich class, right, the upper layer, the top layer of the society, and Elizabeth, middle class, right? Yeah, it's in between the upper and the middle class, nobility, but again not belonging to the top layer of the society. So again the class difference is there. And also when it comes to Darcy's mindset, what is the theory that you can apply there, Reverend? What are we looking at? If we are talking about the way that Darcy thinks, right? What is the study about the mind?
Psychology.
Exactly, right? Psychology, right? Yeah, psychoanalysis, very good. So you can look at it as a psychoanalytic novel as well, because Darcy is this introvert, right? A desperate introvert, doesn't know how to convey his ideas, right? So he has something in his mind, but he's conveying a totally different idea. Something very insulting comes out of his mouth. He doesn't, even need to say that, but that somehow comes out of his mouth because he doesn't know how to communicate, right? So that's something psychological. Right? So we are talking about different psychological stuff. When you explore this gender study course, right, you would see how this Room with a View, and also how this Lady Virginia Woolf, right, all these people are talking about these things, right, about the mind. So they are challenging this idea of female mind, right, male mind and female mind as well. Okay. Right, so that is the idea of the dynamics of textuality, Reverend, right? That means when it comes to a text, you can look at it with different perspectives. Yeah. Do we have time only until 2:30 today, reverends? Yeah, the time flies. It's almost 2 now. Okay. Still we are in the first slide. Okay, right. And then the relations between literary and other texts. Again, you can see when it comes to a literary text, right, it is not only limited to that specific text. So you saw what we did with Upagupta, right? We discussed it according to Buddhism, right? So that's what Tagore is doing there. Tagore is not even a Buddhist, but you can see how he has kind of, incorporated that idea there, right? Yeah. So he's incorporating Buddhism there, right? Yeah. There you can see, and also the class difference and everything is there. You can see, right? Different communities, different people, right? Gender, all these things are there. So you cannot kind of look at a text as a single unit, Reverend. That when you explore any text, even when we take one ode by Keats, you may suggest any ode that comes to your mind out of the stuff that you have done. Okay, Ode to Nightingale, right? So you can do a very nice psychoanalytic, right, criticism on it. Why? Because you can see his mindset there, right? Can you remember the references to drowsy numbness, right? My heart aches, a drowsy numbness. That means he was feeling what? He was in immense pain, right? So his feelings are there. Literally his feelings are there. He's venting out all his emotions. So we are talking about that later when we explore Aristotle's Poetics, right? We identify that phenomenon called catharsis. That means you are venting out your emotions. So Keats is doing that. So you cannot talk about Keats, and as he suggested, Ode to a Nightingale, without looking at psychology, right? Maybe we are not doing it directly, Reverend. Maybe we are not incorporating psychology directly, right? But again, even unconsciously we are doing that, because when you read those lines, you can see he loves life, he wants to live, but he knows that his days are numbered. What do you mean by days are numbered, Reverend? It's a phrase that you can use. Your days are numbered. That means? Yes, Reverend? Already fixed, as in, that his lifetime is already fixed. Days are numbered means you have only a few days to live, right? Yeah, only as you said, a fixed set of days. So he knows that he is going to die anyway. So that pain is there, that fear is there. You can feel that, right? Yeah, and also you can see how he tries to resonate with nature, right? Yeah, so likewise. Okay. And then, and the categories and social conditions through which our engagement with texts is organized. So I already told you, right? Our engagement with texts is always defined by all these social contexts, right? Yeah. So that's why sometimes you are unable to understand some books if you do not know about the social context, right? So you are doing French, Reverend, right? I remember. See, my memory is good. Yeah. Okay. So have you done this book called The Count of Monte Cristo? No, right? So that's a nice book. So a book that you have studied, Reverend? Not doing literature, only the language, right? Okay. Right, okay, grammar and all these things, right? Yeah, okay, yeah. So, if we talk about this one book, Reverend, right? The Count of Monte Cristo, that's a French book. It's translated to English and several other languages into Sinhala as well, right? Yeah. So, I'm pretty sure that it is translated to your native language as well. It was translated to all the languages, I guess, because it's such a beautiful book. It was so popular, right? So without kind of an awareness about the French society, I would say, right, you cannot, I would say, enjoy the book. Yeah, something like that. So, have you heard about this book called Gora by Tagore or Geetanjali? Right? It's totally okay if you have not heard of such works, right? I'm just kind of, referring to things that which are kind of crossing my mind. So, let's say any Indian book. Let's take Malgudi Days. I'm pretty sure you have heard of Malgudi Days, right? That's okay. Okay, right. So Malgudi Days, so any book, Narayan's, right? Any book, right? So you cannot enjoy, you can read, right? Of course, you can read any book, but without an awareness of that setting, that culture, you cannot enjoy those books, right? So let's say that there's this writer called Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, right? Vanga literature. So in his books you can see always, the women are cooking. So if a European reads this, if he's not aware of the social setting of ancient India, right? So women used to cook, right? So that's kind of I'm not saying that it's nice. I'm not kind of, I do not agree with that. That's a different case. But we need to accept that, Reverend. That was the society back then, right? Yeah. But if a European reads this, and he would be very much offended that all the women are cooking and men are just sitting, right, without doing anything. That person would be very offended. But without being offended, we can read this book if we have a picture about this society. So that was the society back then. So without being offended, we could enjoy the book. If we know about the social situation, we can analyze it later, right? According to a feminist viewpoint, we can analyze it. That's a different case. But when we have an awareness about the social setting, right, we can enjoy, right? Even that poem Upagupta, right? So that shows the willpower of that Rembrandt, right? The spirituality, the cleanliness, right? But we need to understand the social setting, right? That type of ladies were there at that society, right? Even there were, all these people in Lord Buddha's time, right? So likewise, we need to understand the social setting. So without that social setting, without understanding that social setting, we cannot explore a text, right? So that's what I wanted to say. So that Count of Monte Cristo cannot be read without an understanding of that French context, right? Yeah, like that. I hope I'm clear there. So the same thing applies to Sri Lankan novels, right? Let's say that you are reading something, like a translation, an English translation of a Sri Lankan book, right? So when you come across something that would be kind of, let's say, unfamiliar to you, right? Let's say some sort of a cultural festival, right? So it is unfamiliar to you, then you can ask him, what is this? Then what are you doing? You are exploring the Sri Lankan context. So that applies to you as well, Reverend. Let's say that you are reading a novel which is translated from his native language. When you come across something, let's say, unfamiliar to you, a cultural context, then you can ask him, what is meant by this? That means you are trying to understand the social setting there.
Yes, so whenever we hear a story or Logunandan.
Yes, exactly. So he may have had several questions, right? Exactly, right? So that's why I'm kind of against having all these authentic words in books. It is good when it comes to the local readership. I'm not referring to one specific language, right? It is good to have all these words, authentic words, but at least you should have a glossary, right, to explain the meanings of those words. Otherwise, the international readership, right? So for your literature, he's an international reader, and for Sri Lankan literature, you are an international reader. So there should be accessibility. But in action and reaction, I don't think there's that accessibility at times. So you have questions, Reverend, likewise. So that's what we mean by this relationship between the social context and literature, right? Yeah. Okay, so with that we come to an end of that definition. So do you have any questions about that, Reverend? If you want me to explain more, you may let me know.
Since I'm a slow learner, I need to read again and again.
Okay, so you have not seen slow learners, right? That's why you are identifying yourself as a slow learner. Don't underestimate yourself.
When I learn something at first time, I
Yeah.
need to go through it over and over.
Okay, that's totally okay.
Find my own way to understand.
Right, I get it, Reverend. So if you have any questions after you go through this, right, then you may come up with any questions, right? Because I'm meeting you 2 days a week now, right? You may ask me anything, right? I'm totally okay with answering your questions because I need you to understand this from the scratch, from the very basics, right? Otherwise you cannot apply all these theories when you write, right? Yeah, so that's the idea. Okay, right. And then there's this Jonathan Culler's definition, the body of thinking and writing, which should be understood functionally rather than ontologically, right? So ontology, do you know the meaning of ontology, Reverend? It's totally okay if you don't know. Okay, so ontology means the study about the nature of being, right? Yeah, you may write it down. I don't think I have a marker pen. B-E-I-N-G, being, Reverend, the existence. The study about the nature of being. The nature of being. B-E-I-N-G, being, Reverend. Do you want me to send it as a text? No. Are you all good, Reverend? Yeah. So, not ontologically, right? That means not related to the state of being. That means, Reverend, the state of being means the way that we exist, right? Yeah. Am I clear there? The way we live, I would say, right? The reality, yeah, reality. The studying reality, I would say. Ontology means talking about the nature of being. Let's say it is related to the relationship between the concepts, right? Concepts within a subject area. Right? Yeah. Concepts of a subject ontologically. The nature of being and also the nature of the concepts of the subjects. But here the idea is that we should not understand it ontologically, right? Not related to the nature of the concepts, right? I'm not referring to the concepts, right? The nature of the concepts, as in how are these concepts formed? That's not how we look at it, but functionally. Functionally means practically. That means how we can see these concepts practically in the world, how they are used, right? Because that's what we were talking about up to now, Reverend, right? How we can see Marxism in Great Expectations, the way Pip behaves, the way Pip climbs the social ladder. And see, we are talking about the practical aspect of these concepts. That is the idea here. So I just put this definition because you need to identify scholarly definitions as well. If we understand it simply, ontologically means you are looking at the nature of concepts, right? The concept as it is. But when it comes to literary theory, definitely we are looking at the concept. That's what we were discussing about up to now. but we are looking at how this concept is practically used, right? Practically used in the literary texts, right? Let's say in Pride and Prejudice or any of Austen's novels, what is happening, right? She's using them practically in the novel. Even when you write a poem, right? You are doing that. You are not intentionally using a theory, maybe, right? But you are doing that. Let's say that you are talking about poverty in a poem, right? So you are not intentionally thinking that I'm going to use, Marxist literary criticism. I'm referring to page 32 of this book, right? No, you're not doing that. But what you are doing is you are unintentionally, right, making it available in your poem, making Marxist literary criticism available in your poem unintentionally, without directly doing that, right? So that means literary theory is about the practical usage of concepts. So we are not just kind of, putting all these concepts on a pedestal, right, and worshipping them, right? That's not what we are doing. Is that clear, everyone? Okay, so that's about the first slide. So any questions that you have up to now before you go and analyze it and understand it properly, Reverend? I can give you time to think of it and understand, even right here, right? If you want more time, please ask, that's okay. By the way, do you have lectures after this, Reverend? No. Do you mind staying for some time more after 2:30 if you don't have anything? Is it okay? Because then we can kind of discuss more if it is not a burden for you. Because I don't mind doing it. Is it okay? Maybe until 3, because it's kind of, we have only around 20 minutes to 2:30. If it is okay only, okay, right. I don't want Reverend Nandasiri to kind of, skip a lot as well, because he also needs to kind of, understand all these basics. But anyway, I'll share the recording with him. Let's see, okay. Let's say we continue until 2:30 and then I'll give you a short break and let's see. If you are okay with it, we will continue at least until 3. Yeah. Okay. So any questions from the first slide, Reverends? Okay. Okay, Reverend. Right. If you want me to explain it more kind of, simply, let me know. Right? I'm all okay with it. Right? Yeah. Okay. Then shall we move to the next slide? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So here you can see 1980s, right? That is identified as a specific era, right? So the idea of theory came into being in the 1980s, right? So that doesn't mean the idea of theory was not there before, but it was not kind of identified as theory with the word theory, right? So we are starting with Aristotle's Poetics. So you would see, right? So it was way before 1980s, right? Aristotle is this very ancient philosopher, right? Yeah. But again, you can see the word theory came into being as a specific area of study during this time, right? That's why it is identified as the era of theory, right? 1980s is identified as the era of theory. So let me check whether I have this book. I bought it. No, it's in the vehicle, I guess. Yeah. So during this period, the idea of theory came into being. All these different subjects can be sociology, can be political science, right? And then what happened? It entered the stream of literature as well, right? Yeah. So that means there were literary theorists, Reverend, right? So there are sociologists. Are you doing sociology? As in, do you have it as a subject here? No, right? No, right. So that is a different subject stream, sociology. So we call them sociologists or sociology theorists, the people who made up the theories. Likewise, in the literary arena too, in the literary stream too, so there were these literary theorists, right? So that's what happened. So the other people were coming up with theories and they were applying all these theories to their different subject streams. And what happened was, these people, the people who are inside this literary stream, they also came up with these theories, right? Yeah. Okay. And then here you can see another definition. Literature is largely determined by ideological and institutional factors rather than inherent textual qualities, right? So this is said by whom, Reverence? Terry Eagleton. So he is a literary critic. He's still alive. He's 82 now, right? He's still alive. So there you can see that this is a very new field that you are exploring, something very modern, right? Yeah. So Terry Eagleton was there when the literary theory as a subject stream was still a baby, right? In 1980s it was just an infant, right? So in this stage of infancy, right, he was there, one of the leading theorists, right? And the fact that he is still alive, right, it shows you that this is a very modern discipline. Literary theory is a very modern discipline. So what does he say? Literature is determined by ideological. So we discussed about different ideologies, right? So feminism is an ideology, right? The way you look at women, right? So you can either objectify women or you can respect women, right? Likewise. So you can just consider people as the arms of the labor force or as individuals. So that's what happened with Romanticism. Can you remember? With the Industrial Revolution, people were considered just as arms. Can you remember we discussed a concept called reification, Reverend? People were reduced to the state of machines. Yeah, so like that. So after that, what happened with Romanticism? You had written about those things nicely in your answer scripts about individualism, right? Some of you have written such things. You don't remember what you wrote for the exam. That's okay. So individualism, right? What do you mean by individualism, Reverence? Yes. You have written several stuff. Yes, he's coming up with something. No, I'm pretty sure that you remember that you are thinking too much to come up with a very, scholarly definition. I'm just asking you, going by the word itself. Exactly. So people are identified for their individuality, Reverend, right? So different people, right, have different individualities, different identities. So those are respected without kind of, reducing them to just forces or arms of the labor force, right? Labor community. right? And also, just the slaves of the church, they are respected for their individuality. So something like that. So those are ideologies, right? Romanticism is an ideology, right? You have different ideologies. So your ideologies are shaped by Buddhism, right? By nationalism, by culture. Different ideologies are there, right? Yeah. So I told you that some Muslim ladies, they don't think that covering their face, right? Only the eyes are visible. Sometimes most of the people, most of the ladies, they don't consider it as something wrong, right? That ideology is inserted to their mind. So I have to cut off all these things, right? So it's like that. Those are ideologies, Reverend. That's what I'm referring to, right? So here you can see literature is determined by ideologies and institutional factors. So when it comes to Western literature, what was the biggest institution that there was? Western part of the world as an institution. What happened during the middle period, middle age, dark age? Who was controlling? Exactly, right? Yeah. Of course, Reverend. That's the answer I was looking for. So, church is an institution, right? Yeah, religious institution that was controlling the whole society, right? The fathers were controlling everything, right? Yeah. So that's an institution, and also education as a body can be identified as an institution, not just one school, Reverend, right? The system of education, right? Yeah, institutional thinking, right? Am I clear there? So you have different ideologies, and also you are governed by different institutions. There are different rules and regulations, right? Yeah, you are governed by those. In every religion, in every culture, you would see these. So these are called, that there are ideological systems and also there are institutional systems. Sometimes ideological systems are stronger than institutional systems, right? Let's say institutional laws and regulations are there, right? Sometimes culture can be stronger than that, right? Even when something is allowed in an institution, right? Let's say that in an institution, let's take a university, right? So there's this rule, let's say there's no rule that boys cannot wear shorts, right? But do you think that most of the people would wear? No, because it is something related to culture, right? Let's say in Sri Lanka, right? People would not. So at Chapura, again I'm going to cut these off right from the recording. So what happens is there's no rule that boys, even girls, so they cannot wear shorts. But there's an unspoken rule, right? Here, this person is talking about Terry Eagleton, right? Yeah, so I just gave you an example that you can understand the difference between institutional and ideological. And also in that example you can see how ideology is stronger than institution, because people kind of think that if you stay after 8:30 then you would be identified as a bad person, then people would rush out, right? That would happen. So ideology is important, right? Yeah. Yes. And then rather than inherent textual qualities. So inherent textual qualities means reverence. So the qualities that you see inside the text, and also the metaphors, the literary devices that you see, right? So when it comes to literary theory, we are not directly looking at all the metaphors, as in we are not analyzing the literary quality of it. When we were studying romantic literature, we were appreciating them a lot, right? The literary devices, we were appreciating how beautiful all these Keatsian metaphors are, his similes are, right? We were going through each of them. But when it comes to literary theory, we are not looking at those textual qualities. We are looking at the ideological, the institutional, the socio-political, cultural stuff that we can say. That means we are looking more at themes. So when we are just analyzing, we are looking at the themes, we are looking at the literary devices, we are giving an equal weight to all these. But here we are more specific about the theoretical part, right? The ideological, institutional, theoretical part. Simply themes, I would say, right? As themes, you would get all these theories. In Great Expectations, what were the themes, reverence? Ambition, right? Climbing the social ladder, right? And also the absurdity of great expectations, all these things, right? So those are related to what? The themes, right? Yeah. And again, you can see ideological stuff, theoretical stuff there. That's what meant by Terry Egerton, right? Okay. And then, literary text should be understood as dialogues with other texts. So we call this phenomena intertextuality. Don't get this confused with the word that I used earlier, intersectionality, two different things. Intertextuality. Right? So intertextuality means, so you look at texts as dialogues between the other texts, right? So when it comes to a Theragatha or Therigatha, right, you can look at it as a piece of literature, right? And also you can look at it as a stanza in Buddhism, right? Two entirely different perspectives. But the best way to look at it would be, when we are studying literature specifically, right, then you can identify it both as a text related to literature and Buddhism, right? Thera Therigatha. So that would be one example. That is intertextuality. So when you read, let's say, a Theragatha, right, you can identify several Buddhist concepts inside it. Inside this one particular Theragatha, Reverend, right? So that means you are referring to Buddhism as a text, right? You are referring to Tripitaka. So you are kind of, you are reading a poem, you are reading a Therigatha, let's say, right? Then you suddenly remember, oh, I have studied this when I was kind of, when 10 years or 15 years back, I have read this as a Buddhist concept. Then you are drawing the connection between two texts. That means intertextuality, right? Yeah. So in Great Expectations, we draw that connection. So this concept intertextuality was identified by this lady, Julia Kristeva, right? By her female mind, she has invented it. So any questions up to this point, reference? No, Reverend? Okay. Then you may decide what you want to do. If you want me to continue for another 30 minutes or more, I can do that. Or even 1 hour. That's totally okay by me. Don't think about it from my side. If this is a burden for you, because I understand that this is a lot, right? You may decide. You can just take a break and come again, or else we can call it a day and then continue the next day. You may decide, Reverend. I'm not getting offended. Okay, so we were there at intertextuality, right? Yeah. Okay. So we will move to Roland Barthes. So again, he's someone very influential. He's no more, right? So he's a French theorist. So this person was looking at language as a system of signs, right, Reverend? So system of signs means we call something by a name, right? Because that is identified by someone with that name. So let's say if you didn't call this a phone, if you call this a chair, right? You would have called this a chair, right? Something like that. So all these things are named, but those names are signs, right? Those are arbitrary signs. I think we have discussed this earlier, right? I vaguely remember that I discussed this with you. So the arbitrary means those are applied. So those are not true, right? So again, that is there right now. So that's why we are using, if I call this a flower, people would call me crazy, right? Why? Because the system is there now. It is installed in our mindsets, right? Yeah.
But from the beginning, if it's named by power, everybody will know.
Very good. Exactly, Reverend. That's the point I was going to make, right? So that is about this system, right? So let's say if his name was Reverend Nite, right, and your name was Reverend Susita, right? So again you can see that's a sign, right? A sign. So here if this was named as pencil, right, we all would have identified this as a pencil, and that's why we have different names, different identifications for the same thing, right, in different languages, right? So we would call this chair a putuva, Reverend. What is it in your language? Chair?
We call it as
Chair, okay. So let's take something that happens with the lingua franca, influence of English, British again colonization, that we are talking about post-colonial theory as well. So likewise we can talk about these incidents in our life as well. Even we can analyze some conversation which is happening right now, right, under post-colonial theory, because we all would call this a phone. The Sinhala word would be durakathanaya. I'm pretty sure you also have a word, but all of us call this a phone. If I call this a durakathanaya, people would say araganita pissu. That means that woman is crazy, that woman is mad, right? Yeah, likewise. Because those things have been generalized by colonization, by imperialism. We have discussed about language imperialism, Reverend, right? It is far greater and far more dangerous than the imperialism which is kind of, falling upon on lands. Language imperialism. They have invaded our language, right? We are not using the authentic words anymore. Likewise. So for trees, Reverend, is there a specific word in your language? Tree? Gus. Is it the same word? It's nice, right? It is the same, Reverend. We also call Gus, right? It's not that he has become more Sri Lankan than, it's not like that, right? Okay. Anyway, right? So here you can see, so there are different semiotic signs, right? That's why we have different words. Yeah. So likewise, you can see. So here, that is why literature is also identified as a system of science. Why? Because we are using language reference, right? To write literature, to explore literature, to analyze literature, we are using language. So that is our instrument, right? So basically literature is a system of science, right? That must be decoded through theoretical frameworks, and that's why we can decode it. You know about codes, right? Can be computer codes, right? And in all these detective stories you get different codes, right? To enter a certain area you have to have a code, and in some bags you might have seen, in luggages there are codes, right? To lock and unlock, right? So coding and decoding, right? Unlocking a code means you are decoding something. Likewise, this system of sign can be decoded by theoretical frameworks. So for an instance, let's take Great Expectations. I'm referring to this because we have studied these recently, right? Yeah. So when you studied Great Expectations in the last semester, right? You were not just reading it, you were decoding it as a system of science, using literary theories even though you were not aware you were doing that, maybe, right? Yeah. So when you look at Pip as someone with an identity crisis, right? As someone who is desperate to climb the social ladder, desperate to become a gentleman, right? Yeah. He's becoming very snobbish as well. He's turning to be a snob towards the end of the novel, even though he changes towards the very last pages, right? So there you can decode his character, right? That is the idea. So you are reading the words are signs, right? Words are symbols, and you are decoding these symbols according to the Marxist theory. That's why you are talking about class dynamics. That's why you are talking about the idea of becoming a gentleman. Why is Pip desperate about everything, right? That's why you are talking about all this. That means you are decoding these words. You are decoding this system of science using theory, right? Even though you were not aware, you have done it very nicely, right? When you were writing about Great Expectations, can you remember your assessment? Yeah, it was about Pip's first visit to which house? Very good, Sadie's house, right? Yeah. So, yeah, you can see that I'm impressed, right? So, there you can see. So, what were you doing there? You were using Marxist theory, right? Because you were looking at class dynamics, the power dynamics, right? And then you were decoding the system of science, that means the words that you came across in Great Expectations. That's what happened there. Is the definition clear, Emperor? The definition of Roland Barthes? Yeah. Yes, Reverend. Which word, Reverend? Decoding. Okay. I would say deconstructing. Is it something more difficult? Yeah. So it's like, that you have a construction. Let's say you have a building and it becomes old, right? So exactly. So let's imagine that in your temple, you have very old and ancient building. It's going to fall off at any time. Then you have to destroy it to build a new building there, right? Something like that. So you have to deconstruct it, you have to destroy it, right? So here what we are doing is, we are not taking these words as it is exactly, right? We are taking them, we are not destroying, but we are deconstructing it, right? It's different than a building, right?
I misunderstood the grades and UK as a home.
Oh yeah.
It also deconstructs
Yeah, okay, that's okay. I will just go through it, Reverend, right? I just wanted you to look at, because that story is very nice, because my father had a student who wanted to kind of, disrobe, right? Because of several reasons. And my father gave him this poem, right? Now he's a chief there right now. This poem changed his whole perspective, because it's not about momentary pleasure, right? How worldly realm is something very, I would say, momentary, but spiritual realm, how strong it is, right? So likewise, so there you can deconstruct the idea of a relationship between man and woman, right? It's not just physical. So there you can see all these people who seek kind of, who sought physical pleasure, they are just abandoning this person when she's sick, right? When she's kind of, very unpleasant. There's no one to give a drop of water to this lady. But then that reverend says, now I'm here, right? So he's there to attend. So how spiritual is that? How powerful, right? How selfless is that act? So something like that. So I wanted you to think of, those relationships, right? The idea, how the physical world is deconstructed. So people kind of, look at all these physical worlds in a very kind of, I would say, a superficial manner, right? Very surface manner, right? Yeah.
And with the he also deconstructs the social values that prioritizing temporary pleasure.
Exactly, right? So we deconstructs that idea, right? Yeah. So you can see. So people give an unnecessary value to the material world, physical world, right? But he deconstructs that idea via spirituality.
And he kept his promise.
Exactly. So it was very nice, and it in a way reminds me of this story of Angulimala Thero, stop, right? So I have stopped, you have to stop. So that sounds absurd at first, because Lord Buddha is literally walking, right? He is walking and saying that I have stopped. So you have to kind of, look at it in a metaphorical manner. And here also Reverend Upagupta is coming. How noble is that coming back, right? So the other people were just coming and going. But this person is coming when, that he is most needed, right? When the humanity is needed, he is coming, right? And again, without breaking the spiritual boundaries. That is the most beautiful. That's what makes the poem more noble, I would say. Right? Yeah. So there you can deconstruct the idea. Right? Yeah. So here, did I answer your question, Reverend? Coding and decoding. Let's say that you are kind of, coding a bag. A luggage, let's say, you are applying a code. Let's say 1904. That is your code. Right? And then you want to change the code. Then you are decoding it and entering a new code. Right? It's like that. So you are not just looking at great expectations as a Bildungsroman. What do you mean by a Bildungsroman, Reverend? The story of an individual?
How the people's life change suddenly.
Exactly, very good. That means, it's like the story of an individual from the beginning to the end. From childhood to adult, as you said, the changes, not a sudden change, Reverend, but how his life changes from his birth to death. Right? Yeah, likewise. So there you can see. So, but you are not looking at that story just as Pip's story. It's not Pip's life story. We have nothing to do with Pip's story, right? He's just an individual. It's just like gossip, right? If we just look at it in that way. But when we deconstruct it, when we decode the story, when we decode the plot, we can identify several political ideologies there. We can identify the class system, right? So you can see the higher class, Miss Havisham, right? And Estella, who is kind of, has an arbitrary class value. She's belonging to the lower class, but she thinks of it in a very arbitrary manner. She has attributed all these higher class manners to her, lifestyle. And Pip is willing to climb the social ladder and become a gentleman. He always dreams of becoming a gentleman, right? So what are you doing there? You are decoding the story, right? And when I ask you what is the meaning of Estella's name, you just came up with the idea star. So that is just reading. You are not decoding there, right? But when you think of Estella's behavior, right? Why Estella behaves in that manner, right? Then you are decoding the story, right? And why Miss Havisham is using Pip, right, for her revenge, her plight, and also you can talk about it in a very psychoanalytic manner as well. And as we discussed Darcy's character, right? Why is Darcy conversing in such a manner? Can you remember Darcy says that you would be the last person I would dance with? Something like that, something very rude. He doesn't want to say that, but he doesn't know how to communicate with Elizabeth. That's why he's saying something like that. So when you just read something on the very surface level, what you can do is you can call Darcy a very rude person. And you can hate Darcy, right? You can grow this immense hatred inside yourself about Darcy. But what happens when you decode his character psychoanalytically? Then you can identify he is an introvert. That's why he is behaving in that manner. We need to sympathize with him. We need to understand him, right? As you said, Atupanayaka Dharma, right? We need to kind of, go to his mindset, invade his mindset and think, what if this happens to me? How would I behave, right? Like that. Is that clear, everyone? Yeah, okay. And okay, so here you can see there's this idea by Peter Barry, right? I bought this book, but I have left it in the vehicle. There's this book called Beginning Theory. So initially I thought of sharing the entire book with you, but then I thought it would kind of, would be a burden for you. So because of that, I would share some chapters and, some chunks of the book with you. So that would be the ideal guide for this course, literary theory, right? I think the book might be available in the library, and also you can go and explore the library as well, reference, right? So there's a huge collection of books. You can just study there, you can borrow books, right? Yeah. Okay. So here this person, the person who wrote this guide to literary theory called Beginning Theory, Peter Barry, you can see his name here. So he has uttered this quotation. My own feelings about the various kinds of theory have changed a bit too. In particular, I now find structuralism rather more interesting than post-structuralism. Can you see that reference? Yeah, Peter Barry's quotation. So, structuralism and post-structuralism, we will discuss all these later, right? So, structuralism is basically connected to modernism. That means about the different types of, as in different genres of categories, like short story, novel, poem, right? Different structures were there. And under structuralism, literature was identified as a system of science. That's what we discussed here, right? Yeah. And then came a time, the time of deconstruction or post-structuralism. So then, during this time, during the times of deconstruction, that's where these people, Roland Barthes, Derrida, all these people come. We discussed about Barthes today, right? So they were saying that there's no single meaning to a text, right? There's multiplicity. And that's what we discussed today as well, right? You cannot just identify Pride and Prejudice as a love story. When we look at the larger picture, it's not love story at all. Right? There is some romance, that's true. But the larger picture, you have class, you have gender, right? You have individuality. There are several things that you need to explore in that one single book. So under structuralism, you can just identify it as a love story. But when it comes to deconstruction, post-structuralism, you are looking at all these multiple perspectives. So that's why people say that Derrida is influenced by Buddhism when talking about post-structuralism, because Buddhism lets us explore the world with multiplicity, right? That's why Angulimala becomes, right, this kind of, Ahinsaka becomes Angulimala Thero, right? Do you think that if there was anyone else instead of Lord Buddha, that would happen? No, right? So Angulimala would be identified as a criminal. But Lord Buddha had that perspective where multiplicity is allowed. He saw the potential in this Angulimala, the criminal, to turn into Angulimala Thero, right? So the transition, that means again multiplicity, multiple perspectives. So this King Kosala was saying, this Angulimala is a criminal. I want to catch him and then most probably kill him. So that's one single perspective. That might be the perspective of all the people, maybe, right, who were residing at that time. But Lord Buddha's perspective is different, multiplicity. So that's why people say Derrida was influenced by this concept. That's why he came up with the idea of multiplicity, right? Deconstruction. Here you can see Peter Berry was talking about deconstruction. But again in Sri Lanka also you can see that people identify these things in kind of, very different and wrong manners as well. That's why I told you we need to understand these literary theories in a very clear mindset. We need to identify this clearly. Otherwise people come with their different interpretations, right? When they want to kind of, generalize something, they use it, right? It's not like that. We need to very clearly understand what is meant by these things, right? Yeah. So there you can see. So here you can see Peter Berry says, initially he loved deconstruction, but now he likes structuralism. That means only focusing on one single idea. So there are pros and cons, reference, right? So sometimes it would be better if you can read, I would say, Great Expectations just as a story of a child. If you want to very innocently read it without decoding, that is structuralism. But when you are looking at all these ideas, socio-political things, then it is. And also you have a whole lot of criminal details there as well, with Magritte, Estella's mother, right? All these people. Even Estella is coming from this criminal background, even though she kind of has this despicable idea about this lower class. Likewise, right? So Peter Berry says, initially I like deconstruction, but I like structuralism now. So what does that say, Reverend? That means literary theory is subjected to change. Anitya, right? Literally. So that's why I told you, don't think of these things as, permanent things, just like scientific theories. These scientific theories undergo several changes. So something that you have learned 10 years ago might not be in the science syllabus now, like that. So theories are subjected to change. That's why we need to be updated to do literary theory, right? Yeah. So that's the idea there. And also here you can see something very important, that literary criticism seeks to analyze literature. That's what we do with literary criticism. But with literary theory, we are exploring literature on a philosophical level, socio-political, cultural. We are looking at different details, right? Yeah. So we can stop there, reference. It's 1 minute past 3. So you can explore the note, and also I'll share the recording. Tomorrow I have lectures the whole day. Anyway, we don't have the lecture this Friday, right? It's Poet Day, I guess. Something, yeah, a holiday, right? Yeah, you are very aware of the Poet Days because you have several responsibilities falling on Poet Days, right? It's Sunday, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, also